Hey guys, Mr. McSweeney here to help you with composition. So I want to make a quick disclaimer about this. I'm going to give you some rules or ideas, and I want you to know that sometimes these work, sometimes they don't. Some of them are based in science, but we're really also talking about art, which is subjective. So you can break all of these rules. Some are just great guidance to help you get started, and then you can develop your own style. Please don't think of this as you must do this to have a good picture. You have to have as many of these composition ideas as you can to really make beautiful art. Your art and your style is your own. The whole goal of photography, in my opinion, is to tell a beautiful story, whatever that story is. Okay, so now that you know some basics and you know you can manipulate your camera with ISO, aperture, or your shutter speed, let's talk about how you actually frame up what's in this box to make it look good. And I'll tell you about what I do in my videos because I have my own style as well. Is this what everybody should do? Absolutely not. This is just my own style. Let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is rule of thirds. Everybody knows what rule of thirds is in the photography world, and I want to break this down for you. Basically, the rule of thirds, and there's even a rule of thirds setting in like every camera, including like iPhones, where it's gonna put like a tic-tac-toe grid kind of along the thirds of the camera. And you're gonna have these two lines going vertical and two lines going horizontal across your image. The rule of thirds is you want to typically take a subject and put it off center on one of those lines. So either over here or over here, okay? Especially if it's a vertical subject, like a tree or a person. Where those points intersect is where you want to put the most interesting piece of that subject. If it's a human or an animal, that's usually the eye. When you are looking at a picture, your brain will automatically look for eyes first. So if you take a portrait of somebody and you place them off center, right about here is where one of those rules of thirds are. If you put my eye here and snap a picture, it's going to be the best picture. Scientifically, you never know. So that's rule of thirds. It's off-centering things and then making sure the most interesting piece of that subject is in one of those intersecting line points. You can go into settings on your camera and turn on grid lines, is sometimes what it's called. Do you have to use it? Absolutely not. I am currently not using it, and I'll tell you why. Now, you also have symmetry. I like to use symmetry in my videos. You can see behind me I've created symmetry with these black boards, these lamps, those conjugation boards, what they are, and then the tables behind me. So I've created symmetry that way. I just think it looks really nice for this type of instructional video. It's not too busy. While there's some visual elements behind me that make it slightly interesting rather than being up against like the whiteboard or something where there's no information or anything like that. This kind of makes it look like I'm in a cool, interesting space, which hopefully makes me more interesting, even though I'm super boring. So you can use symmetry in your photography, where you can even think about how many items are in a picture, right? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, whatever. Maybe you're taking some pictures of leaves and you want to use symmetry numerically with the amount of leaves, or you want to find just some really symmetrical buildings and frame your shot so it looks even on both sides. And you want to ignore the rule of thirds. You can do that. You can use the rule of thirds and have symmetry, right? Maybe you put 2 people in your picture and they're both on that line, or 2 trees and they're both on those rule of third lines. There's lots of different things you can do. Have some fun messing around with that. Now, there's a whole other side of that of using asymmetry, which is equally interesting, and I have done that in videos before where I've used asymmetry. You can really do some creative expression using asymmetrical things or odd numbers even, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, whatever of objects. That's totally okay too. It just depends on what kind of story you're doing. There are sometimes you will see asymmetrical footage when people are doing interviews, and they'll kind of sit off to the side and it looks like they're talking. These are on like documentaries, sometimes they're like really punched in and they're like, yeah, I remember this time. They're not looking at the camera. I remember this time when I was growing up when we went sailing, and that's an asymmetrical shot using the rule of thirds. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that you can use either symmetry or asymmetry and the rule of thirds. Ignore the rule of thirds, all that stuff to say these are just tools. You don't always need to use a hammer to build something. Okay, let's look at some other ideas. You want to or maybe you don't want to, I should say, balance the shot. So maybe you have something really big on this side and something smaller over this side, or maybe you have something small on this side but it's in the foreground and something huge in the background. And you can use items weight to showcase your photo and make it where your viewer of your image is going to move their eyes all around the image trying to catch some cool stuff. That is just a way of doing it. You can unbalance photos and make things seem really weird. That's totally cool too. Weird is not bad in photography. I probably shouldn't even use that word. You can use unbalanced images to make your picture come off as different. Okay, so try both. Mix and match all these rules of thirds, symmetry, asymmetry, balanced, unbalanced, all of those things. One of my favorite, it does not need to be your favorite. In fact, I have a former student who works with MLB, Major League Baseball, and he is one of their principal photographers. He works down in Miami. He flies all over the country taking pictures of sports teams, and he and I disagree on this. I love leading lines, and he's like, dude, you don't need leading lines. Leading lines is basically if you can find lines that naturally exist, either, and they can be man-made like roads or hallways and things like that. There's lines everywhere, and you take those lines and you kind of make those lines point to something interesting. People do that a lot, and you can take pictures of hallways, and the hallways kind of close off towards the end based on your perspective, and you can put a subject kind of in the middle of that or off to the side, and the leading lines kind of guide your viewer. Maybe you find a road that's got some cool curves on it, or you're at a sporting event and you're using the leading lines that naturally exist in sports arenas to help you convey the message you want to convey. You can completely ignore those and use those to cut up your image however you want. Using the viewpoint or the vantage point is really, really important. If you raise or lower the camera, tilt the camera down and take a picture, or squat down, take a picture looking up, that will influence what the viewer sees. That can create feelings of being small or being giant and imposing. Sometimes people get on roofs or fly drones to get really different vantage points of what people typically don't see, and you can get really interesting viewpoints by getting further back or getting really close to an image. And so the viewpoint can also help you tell your story based on what you want the viewer to see. Really mess around with the background, either adding lots of visual elements or ignoring them and just adding either nothing, right? So if you have nothing behind your subject, you're going to want your viewer to fully focus on that subject. If you have a ton of stuff in the background, you want there to be some confusion, or maybe there's orderly items in the background, and that helps create this sense of order. Mess around with your background, right? And you can do that by either creating your own background, or just changing your viewpoint. Depth is also one of my favorite things to create. Right now, I'm using depth via the aperture, right? I have a really low aperture of f2.8, so my lens is opened up wide, which makes me just in focus, and it kind of blurs out my background. If everything was in focus, it would look kind of weird. It would look like I'm in front of a green screen right now, but hopefully you can tell that this is actually for real space. Right, if I come all the way back here, you can see that this is actually real space, and that's important to me. I love having depth in my stuff. You don't have to have depth, right? That is just something, that's an element that I love. You can use that especially if there's hills or If you're at an ocean and there's waves, you can use the waves to create depth. Anything you can do to add subjects and create some sort of distance does help, but also sometimes it can distract, right? So maybe you want to use depth, maybe you don't. That's what I'm trying to get you to understand. These are just different types of tools. Framing can be kind of an interesting technique to start messing around with. There's loads of natural frames. Imagine you have a picture frame that you're trying to shoot a picture through, but you can use all kinds of naturally occurring frames or man-made frames as well. So maybe there's some trees, or there's a bush that creates an archway, or you're down in Nancy Creek and the bridge that goes over to summer camp, right? And you get inside the creek and there's a natural frame. You have the water, the little cliffs, and then the bridge, and you can have a frame within that. You can use anything to create a frame. People can be frames, even framing out somebody else. So there's lots and lots of different things. You can use windows or really anything at all. Play around with frames. They can be really cool, or they can be really distracting. Like I said, there's no rules. I'm just trying to show you guys some tools that you guys can use and maybe not use. So when you're looking at building composition, I want you to start thinking about also manipulating those camera basics of ISO, shutter speed, aperture, as well as some of those ideas. Now there's like tons of other ideas. Those are just some of them that I'm throwing at you. They are not necessarily rules, they're guidance that you can ignore. That's what's fun about art, is that yes, there is some science, such as what I mentioned about eyes, is that people will naturally look for eyes in an image, and you can use that to your advantage. But what you really want to do is convey some sort of message in your photography. If you use composition is kind of that science behind this art that's going to support a viewer moving along through your image. And that's what you want. You want your viewer to look at your image for longer. And you can do that by using some of these ideas of composition to help make that a reality. Take your time with this. The best way to do it is just to take hundreds, if not thousands of pictures, just experiment, see what kind of style you like, see what kind of message you're going to tell. I hope this video helps, and good luck.